Digital photography is one of the easiest ways to be creative, but you need to take control of shutters, apertures, and ISO to really get going. So the problem with most cameras is that on auto, they're simply not going to give you any of these shots here. You have to take control of shutters and ISO and apertures to be able to make things happen. Now, the thing is that it's usually shutter or aperture that makes the creative effect that you want by understanding what it is that you're looking for, and the ISO comes in behind that to be able to support it by either giving you more light or you trying to cut down the amount of light that comes in. So auto could not give me any of these shots because I have to make the decision and then bring in the other two to support what I'm doing. And in fact, I may also need to bring in something like a tripod to help me, or I may need a cable release or a remote release. But fundamentally, I have to understand that the settings that I'm choosing are going to cause me a problem. And I have to be able to make sure that I have everything I need to be able to minimize or take that problem away. So let's have a look at the shots themselves. So this particular one here, I need 8 seconds so that the bus can go all the way through the shot. Now, the camera won't give me 8 seconds. It'll want to go shorter. If I'm lucky, I'll get a half second, which means I won't get those light trails. I've used f8 to be a middling aperture, give me depth of field while also letting enough light in and keeping the ISO down because the camera's going to want to put that up there. It gets into a panic because it thinks that we're going to get camera shake. It doesn't know that I have a tripod. In this case here, I've gone very high in the shutter. This is a high-end camera that has 1/8,000 of a second. And I'm using that because I know the only way I'm going to make those grains of sand look like they're hanging in midair is to be able to use a shutter that high. Now I've brought in a small aperture number, which is a physically big hole that brings in lots of light. And I've gone to 400 on the ISO to make sure that the 8,000 gets what I want. So 8,000 is the key number and all the others are coming into support. Likewise here, I'm indoors. It's not so much indoors, it's half indoors because it's a stadium. So the best I can get without going really crazy on ISO while maxing out on my aperture at f5 is 1/500 of a second. But then I know that at the right time, I can take a shot that freezes human action when they're on the turn. So they're coming to a halt, believe it or not, which means that I'm able to get what I want. So I know I need 1/500. I know I can only get to f4, and I know I have to go to ISO 250 to be able to get me there. Again, cameras are not going to do this for you. So 11 seconds is what's needed to be able to have multiple firework bursts recorded in one particular shot. So that's not what the viewer saw. It's multiple bursts layered over each other over 11 seconds. To make sure I don't get an overexposure, I've chosen f11, which lets in less light, and I force the camera to stay at 100 ISO to get that. In this case here, I know that 1/160th of a second is going to give me discs on propeller planes, particularly older ones like these ones here. And that shutter speed also gets me that lovely view, that lovely feel on the water as it's dropping from that tanker. So f11 it's a bright day, so that brings in less light, and I've gone down even lower in the ISO. This camera allows me to go down to 50. Now in this case here, it's a shutter speed of 160, and I needed 7.1 on a dull day to be able to get that, and the ISO is 100. But I'm also using a technique. Knowing that the shutter speed is that slow, I wouldn't be able to freeze the action, so I'm using panning. I'm taking the shot here and I'm continuing all the way through. So I have a technique allied with that shutter speed that allows me to have frozen the action on the bike itself, although I'm getting lovely movement on the wheels, but the riders are sharp and the background is blurred through the camera being moved at that shutter speed of 160. Here I know that I can get people blurring in around a half a second, a quarter of a second, and you can see here that I've got ghosts going on here and everything else is nice and sharp. So f16, not much light coming in. ISO of 3200. Now the f16 is to give me depth of field, and the 3200 is to compensate for the less light coming in, and I get the half second. Here, this is 960 seconds. There's no way you could take that with a handheld camera. So of course, a tripod, any tripod, even one as small as this, is going to help you make that shot happen. And if we look at the numbers themselves, so I've gone f4 because I need as much light coming in as possible. I've kept the camera down at 100 ISO so that I can get that 960 second shutter speed. If I then switch over to predominantly making sure the aperture is getting the effect that I want to be able to make that whole shot just blur and blur and blur and blur until it's almost unimaginable at the background. And I know that 1.8 is going to do that. I know that I'm going to get a fast shutter speed up near the max on that camera, which is 4000. So 200 ISO is where I'm at to be able to make that work. This shot here is 1/2000 of a second, but f4 was the key one because I want almost like razor-like sharpness going through so that only the tip of this rose is sharp, this is sharp, and everything else is really, really blurred in the background. So I've kept 100 ISO so that I can keep good quality, but also I don't want too much light coming in. 1/2000 of this is shutter speed. That's the result of f1.4, which is a very, very big aperture, letting a lot of light in. In this case here, very simple. f4 again is what's needed to blur the macaques in the background. So I've got these two here nice and sharp, and then they're blurred in the background, and this helps them stand out from the crowd, quite literally. And again, f4 is needed. It gives me 1/50th of a second at 100 ISO, and that's enough to make that work. In this case here, I know what a phone will do. It's got an f2.2 aperture. Doesn't change on a phone, by the way. It stays the same no matter what you do. It's only the shutter and the ISO that will change, and I can make this basically seating cover into a field of dreams. And in this case here, the shutter speed is not that important because f8 gives me plenty of depth of field. I keep the ISO very low, and that means I have sharpness from the front to the back, and that's what's really important. So the aperture drives this particular shot. So auto is great. It basically tries to save you from yourself, but it gives you middling settings, middling apertures, middling shutter speeds, middling ISO, just so that you get a sharp shot, which from a compositional point of view means you're going to get something interesting. But to really take it to another level, you've got to take control of the shutters, the apertures, and the ISO to really get going. I hope this helps.